Hello, friends. I hope you are all stunning. I've got another rewind episode for you. Seems like you enjoyed the last one with Aditi Shah from Peloton. And again, in case you're wondering why I'm dropping some of these past episodes, it's because there are many new people here, and these are some of the fave interviews based on your listening over the last 5 years. And this one, with the habit master himself, James Clear, is the all-time most listened to episode of this show. So I can say with confidence, you'll pick up some great value out of this conversation. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of Behind the Human. I am your host, Mark Champagne, and it's my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game personally and professionally. Today I'm speaking with James Clear, author of the international best-selling book, Atomic Habits, creator of jamesclear.com and the popular 321 weekly newsletter, which I have to say is a newsletter that I receive weekly that knocks me back in my chair every single time. So kudos to you for putting that one out. We'll talk a little bit more. And your speaker, weightlifter, former athlete, and contributor to the Against Malaria Foundation, where you donate 5% of all your profits. Welcome to the show, James.
Hey, great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I gave a bit of a background on some of the things you're involved with, some of the projects you're working on, but I'd love to start the show with who you are. So who are you, James, as a person?
Yeah, interesting question. I mean, we all have multiple aspects to our personality or our identity, right? Like, I'm a brother, I'm a son, I'm a husband, I have all these different, elements. But in terms of work stuff, or what makes up the bulk of my time, or like how I think about myself, mostly as like an entrepreneur, a creator, an athlete, maybe a former athlete, although I still do weightlifting, and that still is like a big part of my identity. And then like maybe a little more specifically, a writer, an author. I hadn't thought of myself as an author until Atomic Habits came out, because that was the first book that I wrote. And then like once it was physically there, I was like, well, I guess I can't deny it anymore. But yeah, I think I probably resonate most as like a creator, a builder, an entrepreneur. That's probably how I think about myself in a work context. Sure. And then more generally as a person, I guess like an optimizer, a contributor. I don't know. Like I really like trying to make things a little bit better, whether it's my business or work or whatever, or just personally. And then I like doing things that like are useful, that contribute to the areas around me, whether that's a conversation or a project at work or a relationship. I want to be useful. I just don't want to be spending time. So those are kind of some different lenses through which I think about what I do and how I spend my time.
I love it. The whole idea of optimizer and contributor, or maybe let's just start with optimizer. Like, where did that show up in your life? Do you remember when you started really thinking like that? Because I feel like that, that's not something that we're born with.
Yeah. You can, if I switch the word a little bit, instead of saying optimizer, if I say like editor, someone who's refining things or editing their life or editing their work in various ways. I probably first became exposed to it through sports. I played a bunch of stuff growing up: baseball, basketball, swimming. Yeah. I played football for 1 year. In football, there are people who are giving hits and people who are getting hit, and I was always getting hit. So I didn't stick with that one for as long. But any sports skill that you're developing, whether it's throwing a baseball or whatever, you're repeating it, you're iterating on it, and so you're refining and editing. And so that was definitely a place where you're trying to optimize your skills on the playing field.
Yeah.
And then the whole concept of studying, I always liked school. I was kind of this weird hybrid or orphan in the sense that I never had a home fully with the athletes or fully with the nerds, because I liked both. So I was kind of stuck in between.
Okay.
But I was, I love playing sports, but I also was like, nerdy and loved learning and science. And so that process is also editing and refinement and optimizing, just trying to learn something new or get better at a concept, get a higher score, whatever. So
Hmm.
they both showed up there. And then the third one that I thought of when you asked the question is early on in my life was Legos. I of course am not the only little kid who loved playing with Legos. Seems like everybody loves them, but um, I don't know, something about that little like engineering mindset and like building something. Can we make it a little bit cooler? Can we add a trapdoor? Can we add a secret passageway? Can we, like build on top of what the instructions said and make it something a little bit bigger? I don't know. So I kind of had like a lot of different
Yeah.
where I could, exert
No,
my interest.
I appreciate you answering that in that way, because having been through the book and knowing your work, like it really starts to paint the picture, especially when it comes to, something that you talk about quite a bit about just being 1% better every day. Like everything you mentioned there essentially wraps up into that concept, right?
And I agree, they do connect. For me, it's like fun.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like work. It's like, I'm just curious about how can we do it better. I hear that a lot actually with some of the people that I work with, like my agent, for example, or my publisher. I like to kind of poke at the sides of the box and see like why is this really here? What are we really trying to get at? Is there a better way to do this? And I get the reply a lot, like nobody's ever asked that question before of whatever particular thing we're talking about at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can imagine that, I don't know, maybe that's slightly annoying to them at some points, but I think it serves me really well. And I'm not even really trying to like, let's just tear down everything we already have and like build anew. I'm fine with keeping the stuff that we have as long as there's a good reason for that old process. And so
Yeah.
I'm always trying to like poke at the sides of the box a little bit and see like, is there a better way that we could do this? Maybe is there a way that's what's the 80-20 of this? How can we get most of the output but less of the effort? Or anyway. So I find that fun to think like that. So I think it just sort of bleeds into all the things that I do.
Did you grow up like that, James? Like that element? What strikes me when you're speaking is just this level of, or heightened level of curiosity, kind of forming everything that you're saying right now. Were your parents or your upbringing, was that encouraged, or is just something that evolved for you as you were growing up?
Yeah, it was definitely encouraged. I think my parents did a really great job. My dad mostly with the sports side, my mom mostly with the school side, and just kind of encouraging us to excel in both of those areas and be interested and curious there and so on. So I do
Okay.
think it was fostered to whatever degree it can be. Um, so I was probably lucky in that sense. But I also think part of it's just my personality that I'm just kind of curious for some reason. I don't know. It's hard to put a finger on it. Like I don't even really know why or whatever. But like I said, it just feels
Yeah.
fun to me to dig into things. So I think that curiosity was probably present early on. The optimizing thing I think is probably learned a little bit later. It was like maybe it's a mix of, I do think I'm competitive as well. And so maybe
Hmm.
that is like a mix of those two personality traits. Like you got competitiveness on one end and curiosity on the other. And if you put them together, you end up optimizing things because you're like, well, I want to win whatever game is being played. And then you start getting curious about how to win it. And so you start looking for these different ways or strategies.
Yeah.
And then you start trying to optimize those. So it's sort of like curiosity as a method for competing at a high level.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. And it's, there's a track record here as well, obviously, with the book that's sold over 1 million copies. And we'll get into that in a minute. But like the newsletter as well. I mean, you've got hundreds of thousands of people that have signed up for that. And, I've just for the audience and yourself too, I'm not trying to blow smoke your way. I mean, that I'm pretty protective of what hits my inbox when it comes to newsletters, especially if it's weekly. And yours, without fail, always just like I said, kind of pushes me on the back of my chair to and like look up and reflect. I'm like, wow, where that's a fascinating point. And it breaks my autopilot. So I want to thank you because it's easy to fall in the autopilot of life. So that's a great reflection point for myself personally. But B, I would just love to know, like, what is your process with these newsletters? Like, how do these points come up? Are these just, you musing along all day or throughout the weeks, and you journal on these, or you take notes of these? Like, how do you format these in your own head?
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. I always try to, I don't know if it's a bar that you can hit, but I always try to think of or push myself to say, like, if you were forced to unsubscribe from every newsletter that you subscribe to, I'd want mine to be the very last one. Like,
Yeah.
if you could only keep one, that's the one that you'd want to like hide and keep. So anyway, I don't always hit that mark, but I try to each week. And so my process, to answer your question, I've gone back and forth on this over the years. And what I found was I had this moment when my email list got over 100,000 subscribers where I felt like, oh, wow, now a lot of people are paying attention. Now it's got to be really good. Like, I sort of had this little, I don't know if it was a freak out, but it was like I felt this additional pressure because now the audience was big. And so I told myself, well, now I just need to be writing all the time. Like if I was putting, 20 hours a week in writing before, now it's got to be 40, and I'll just have to find time for the other stuff that I need to do. Like I sort of had this thought, like, if I just worked harder, then it would be better. And I don't know that actually happened. I think actually it may have become a little bit worse or like stagnated. And now, a couple of years through that, after I've worked through it and tried to figure out some other strategies, now I think about it kind of like driving a car. So when you're writing, you're driving around, but every now and then you got to stop at the gas station and fuel up. You got to put gas in the car. And reading is like putting gas in the car. Writing is like driving or going on an adventure. And if you, the point of having a car is not to just sit at the gas station all the time and just fill up. Like, you're not just supposed to just read and consume constantly. But if you never fill up, then you run out of gas, you don't get very far. And so if I ever feel like I don't have good ideas or I don't have something to put together in the newsletter that week or whatever, I just need to refill the tank. I got to go back and read. And so almost all of my good ideas are sparked by consuming something else, by reading, by listening to a podcast, by watching an interesting YouTube clip, whatever. So I really need that balance between fueling up and driving around. And so usually my process is I try to read a bit each day. Again, it comes in all sorts of sources. Sometimes it's books, sometimes it's articles, sometimes it's tweets and whatever. And then as I'm consuming things, I try to have that information feed curated fairly well in the sense that they're high quality, but they're also very diverse. So, I like to think about it kind of like broad funnel, tight filter. So broad funnel, I'm reading widely, exploring widely, coming across a lot of ideas, interfacing with a lot of ideas. And then naturally, as that's happening, that just kind of gets my brain going. I start thinking about things. Maybe I read about an example and it applies to a concept that I read the day before or whatever. And my job is to take that broad funnel and then apply a tight filter to almost like a strainer, just like only let the very best ideas fall through. And so I collect those. So I have a big file. I got, hundreds of notes in Evernote. And if I'm working on a book, it's usually in a Google Doc, and I kind of pile it all in there. But either way, there's this central holding ground, and I put it all there. Okay. And then, when the time comes each week, we kind of put it together in a newsletter.
Love it. Well, I can say if I had access to your Evernote, I feel like I would park at the gas station for days on end.
Well, just slowly it'll come out through the newsletter, so you're getting it.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. Just on the topic of, when you hit the 100K and, something shifted in your mind, I'd like to parallel that with the book, right? Because I'm curious. I've had the great pleasure to interview many authors on the show, but you're at a different level. Like, this is serious when it comes to selling over 1 million copies of a book that you've poured your heart and soul. Not that the other authors are best-selling authors as well, but I'm curious what that feels like, James, for you when you're going through that.
Well, there have been many different stages, so it's felt about every different way that something could feel along the process. When I was writing it, it felt very dark, and the process of creating a book in my case, took, depending on how you measure it, some either 3 years or 6 years, depending on what you pick as the starting point. But 6 years of work made its way into the book in one form or another. And
Yeah.
in particular, there were about 2 very intense years when I was finishing it. And I don't know, it was like easily the hardest project that I had ever completed. I'm glad I completed it because there were moments in the middle when I didn't know that if I was going to be able to. Um,
What pushed you
so,
through?
what's
Sorry to interrupt, but what pushed you through in those tough, messy middle moments?
that? The thing that's so hard about a book is that, unlike a blog post, for example, or a tweet or whatever, for other pieces of content, the feedback cycle is so short. You know, like you have an idea, you tweet it out, people are liking it within 10 seconds. Or you write an article, you send it out over email, and you're getting emails back, you know, an hour later. And so I don't always need everybody to say, this is great. Like maybe sometimes I miss the mark, but I just want to know, like, am I on the right track? With a book,
Sure.
you're writing for a month or 6 months or a year, and like nobody has seen it yet. It still is just a half finished manuscript. And so it was just really hard for me to like toil away and not get any feedback. So I realized that about a year in. So I hired an editor to just read it and just tell me what you think. Like, and honestly, some of the feedback was negative, but it was fine because I just needed somebody to, you know, keep me pointed in the right direction.
Yeah.
So,
Keep you out of the unknown at least.
so that feedback was one of the things that helped me persist. You know, some of it is just like guts and resilience and persistence and all that. And you do feel that at sometimes, and then the next hour, you might not feel that at all. So it really ebbs and flows in that sense. But I think the feedback was crucial. And then support from my wife, my parents, you know, my family members, that it definitely everybody who asked, like, how's the book doing? I hope it's going well. You know, like it seems like an infinite number of conversations like that over the 2 or 3 years that I was really writing intensely on it. And sometimes authors don't like getting those questions because they feel guilty because the book isn't done yet. But I knew at some level people cared, and they just wanted it to go well because they loved me. And so that helped a lot too, having a close group of family in your corner.
Sure.
I think those are probably the 2 main things that helped get me through.
Sure. It reminds me because I was part of building a digital journal called Keo a few years back, or I guess last year is when we shut it down. But it, you know, through the process of creating it over a year or so, same thing, you know, friends, family, like, how's it going? And at the beginning, and Scott Belsky talks about this in his book, The Messy Middle, but at the beginning, right, like the idea's there, everyone's excited and ramped up. But then you actually get into the work of it, which kind of, to your point, right, is a bit dark and alone, and you just need to do it and work. But when people are asking how things are going in that stage, I'm glad you enjoyed that, because for me, I was starting to run out of things. You know, I'm working. It's kind of my, we're still working on it. Like, nothing that exciting. We're following our plan, but we're still working on it.
Oh, believe me, I felt all of that as well. You know, I just knew that they were asking because they cared. And so
of course,
that helped a little bit. There's also, honestly, there's a little bit of fear that motivates you. You know, like I don't want to throw up a 0, not finish the project. You know, now I don't know if the book will succeed, but I got to at least have something between the 2 covers. You know, like I want to at least finish it. So there was that kind of motivating force as well. And all of that sort of, you know, combines to get you through it.
Sure.
After the book comes out, well, then of course it's a totally different feeling. You know, there was once the book was finished, but it hadn't been released yet. Well, now I'm kind of in the marketing window. And so I'm, you know, I feel like I've got this great thing. The world doesn't know about it. So my job is to pour all of my energy into trying to let as many people know as possible. So that was, you know, that was then like the next year, was doing media push and podcast interviews and all that other stuff. And that was kind of, I don't know how I'd feel about it if I had written like 5 books. I don't know, maybe you get tired of it, but it was my first time. So, you know, it felt fun and new to me. It was like, yeah, I've never done a book tour, a big launch or something, you know, like this is, so it was a little fresh in that sense. So that was kind of invigorating. And then after the book came out and it hit the bestsellers list, and then it kind of seemed like it was maintaining momentum, and then it started picking up even more, and we're starting to get foreign rights deals and different languages are translating it. It got to a point where about maybe say from like 3 months after launch to like 9 months after, that 6 month window was just like insane. It felt like every day something was happening that just 3 months earlier would have been like the biggest moment of my month. And
Yeah.
it was now like the third most interesting thing that happened that week. It was just
Sure.
the acceleration of that really took me by surprise and came with its own set of growing pains. It almost felt like overnight I had to learn how to say no to things that I previously would have been excited to say yes to. And
Yeah.
that's I still think I struggle with that, with prioritization, saying no. And I don't know, like you don't want, you want to be helpful. So if people ask you for help or ask you for advice or want you to contribute to a project, like, I would like to do that. But then it got to this point where like, if I said yes to all that, I would never like write anything else because that's what all my days would look like. And you're like, well, the only reason people are interested in the first place is because I was writing things. So then maybe I should
It's a tug of war
and just write more. But then you feel like a jerk because you're telling all these people no all the time. So I don't know. I definitely struggled with that. Like everybody wants to be liked. So and nobody likes to give bad news or turn people down. So anyway, I'm kind of going on here, but the point is there were very different phases throughout the project, and I felt all sorts of different ways at various points. And the one of the tough things about a book is it's so much delayed gratification. All the work, all the pain is up front. It's like you got to come up with a great idea. You have to research it. You got to spend a few years writing it. You could put 3 to 5 years of work in before you ever sell a copy. You got to come up with this great marketing plan, execute on that. But if you're the type of person who's willing to do that, if you can go through all those stages and write a great book and prep and do all these interviews and then hit launch day, it can be a really, really wonderful thing after that. So it really was a huge exercise in delayed gratification, and definitely came with some growing pains for me.
Yeah, I can't imagine. How did your rituals and your practices or your habits help you through? Because I totally can understand how challenging it would be to say no to certain things that, like you said, a few months ago or, a year or whatever it was, would have been like hell yes, and now you just can't, you just can't serve all of them. So, I mean, that's a lot of emotion to process. Did you step up the journaling, or were there certain things that were helping, manage that whole process for you?
Yeah, I mean, talking to my wife about it, talking to my team about it. So just a lot of conversation was going on. You also start to gradually kind of triangulate what's important to you and what's not. Like I still give a fair amount of speeches each year, maybe 1 or 2 a month, something like that. But it had accelerated to the point where I was getting like 2 to 3 requests per day. And so I was like, well, obviously I can't do all that because I can't be in 3 places every day. So it's impossible to do all of them anyway. So that helped a little bit. But then I also started to gradually come to the realization that like, actually, like I like speaking. I do think it's fun when I do it, and I like engaging with the audience face to face. But I want to be building a business that's based around books and writing. So that made it easier to like kind of compartmentalize that bucket and realize that it can play a role, but it should be like a secondary role, not the primary thing that I'm optimizing for. And so that question, actually, I think it was helpful for me. I think it's helpful for a lot of people, which is like, what are you optimizing for? And that helped put a lot of things that otherwise were like really exciting, like, hey, do you want to come speak at this conference in Europe? And I was like, wow, that sounds incredible. I would love to do that. But then if you ask like, what am I optimizing for? You're like, oh, actually, that would be really cool. But then I lose a week of, between travel and everything. And now suddenly that's one less week that I have to write another useful book or put out a newsletter or whatever. And maybe I still want to do it, or maybe I still say yes to it. But now suddenly the trade-offs are more clear. And so if you know what you're optimizing for, I think it becomes easier to say no. And I just, honestly, I didn't quite know in the beginning. I think I gradually sort of developed my personal answer for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you didn't know, right? You had to experience some of that to see, I guess, what the other side looked like to go through that process.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, as I think back on my career, I did that with all sorts of things that I have played no role in my business now. When I first started writing, I thought I was going to write more about health, fitness, medicine. I thought it was going to be more like health habits than just habits in general. And I did this certification. This is like probably 10 years ago or more now, where you may have seen it on commercials or different gyms or whatever, but there are these big, thick, heavy ropes. They look like the ropes you'd have on a ship or something. And
Oh yeah.
you can use them to work out and stuff. Well, anyway, I got certified in this power ropes training thing. And the other day, my wife was like, "You remember you got certified for that?" I like drove to Michigan and like got certified and did this class and everything. It's like a 2-day thing. And it's like, I've never done anything with that, basically. Like it wasn't even, looking
Yeah.
back, it seems like almost silly that I spent the time on it. But at that period in my life, I was experimenting with a bunch of different things to see which
Sure.
took off. And I think that you should continue to do that even now, maybe 80% of my time should be spent on stuff that I know I want to be doing. And then like 20% should just be for like trying new things or different strategies or whatever. Most of them won't work out, but it's very hard to predict where the next great thing will come from. And so I think you need a little exposure to that. And then you can decide, do I want to double down on it or do I want to, cut it out?
Well, that's just pure. Like as you're saying that, I can't help but think about most people firing up new products or companies, right? Like if you're not putting a good percentage into experimentation and pushing the boundaries, I mean, you're just never going to explode out to wherever you want to go, right? It's
What's really hard about it is that there's sort of this like dichotomy. There's competing tensions going on. So like on the one hand, people say like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you lose the
yeah,
basket, you lose everything. And so partially that's, people often talk about diversify your portfolio or things like that. But that's also kind of what we're talking about here. Diversify your interests, have a portfolio of beliefs or business projects or whatever. But then there's this other competing tension, which is don't put your eggs in too many baskets because doing things halfway is actually risky. The more baskets you have, the more you have to manage things, the more you have to divide your attention and compartmentalize. And if you're doing 10 things with 10% of your focus in each, it's really hard for any one of those things to beat somebody who is giving 90% of their focus to one of those baskets. So it becomes difficult to compete if you stretch yourself too thin. And so you kind of have these competing tensions of both of those things are true. And so I think you sort of need something that is your primary focus that gets like 80% of your time or whatever, where I'm putting most of my eggs in this basket. And I know that because I'm giving it most of my time and attention and effort and energy and resources, I'm going to be able to compete at a high level. But then I've also got exposure, I got like one egg and maybe 5 other baskets, and that's the other 20%. And the purpose of that is to be in the game so that I can tell and get feedback if something does go well there, or if I really like it and I want to add that in, or I want to shift more of my attention to it or whatever. The world is dynamic. It's not static. And so because things are always changing, you don't know which basket is going to be the best one to be holding for the next period or the next cycle or whatever. So you do want to have multiple ones, but it's also risky to do things halfway. So you got to kind of figure out a strategy that works for you, that gives you the focus and attention you need, but also the diversification that's really helpful and necessary.
well, and this is where I really love your prompt of, what are you optimizing for? I think that's a great way to narrow in on that 80%, right? And then at least it's clear you've written that out or you've given it some thought, and then you at least know where the goalposts are, right? And
Right.
you can jump into that 20%.
Right.
I'm curious. One of the things I wanted to chat with you about just straight out of the book is your concept of integrity reports. Is that link at all with, just what you're working on? Obviously, I know there's a direct link with the habits and the systems that you have in place, but as you're speaking and as you're describing kind of the 80-20 setup, I feel like that would naturally show up in those reports as well.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it does connect a little bit to the conversation we're having now. So just to get everybody on the same page. So I
Sure.
share even what I call an integrity report, where I write down my core values, or principles, whatever you want to call them. And then I ask myself, like, how have I been living by those over the last year? So that's kind of the pat yourself on the back. Good, you're staying aligned. And then the most important question is the last one, which is, where have I failed to live by those in the last year? And so you start to see, I say that this is important to me, but actually I'm not spending that much time on it. And just a moment ago, I said the world is dynamic. It's not static. Things are always changing. And so you want a little bit of exposure to new things so that you can take advantage of the next wave or be in a good position or more diversified. That's also true about your principles and your values. Like most of your values are probably relatively stable, but things do change and evolve, and you learn new things and you meet new people. And so I think it's worth it to check in every year to be like, is this still a core value of mine? Like, does this still feel like it's worthy of that level of importance? And then whether you add something new or you stick with your old set, are my behaviors adding up to that, or do I need to change something and adjust? So yeah, it is kind of similar to that conversation. It's like, what am I optimizing for? Is maybe more externally focused, but who am I optimizing to become is, sort of internally focused. And I think both of those are important questions.
That is a great question. Who am I optimizing to become?
That actually is very close to one of the concepts I talk about in Atomic Habits. I call it identity-based habits, but the core idea is that every action you take is like a vote for the type of person you want to become. And so this is one of the things, this is maybe the ultimate thing that I think is really important about habits. Usually we talk about habits as like a pathway to external results. Habits can help you lose weight or make money or be more productive or reduce stress. And yeah, that's true. Habits can do all those things, and that's great. But the reason, I think the real reason, the deeper reason that habits are really crucial and important and powerful is that they can reshape your sense of self. They provide evidence of being a certain type of person. It's sort of like your habits are how you embody a particular identity. So every morning that you make your bed, you embody the identity of someone who's clean and organized. If you study biology for 20 minutes on Tuesday night, you embody the identity of someone who's studious. If you meditate for 1 minute, you embody the identity of a meditator. And ultimately, that's like what I think you're really looking to achieve. Is the real goal is not to like run a half marathon. The goal is to become a runner, right? Like the goal is not to read 2 books a year. The goal is to become a reader. And so that question of like, who am I optimizing to become? You could also like ask it in a different form, which is like, what are my habits leading me toward? Who are my habits reinforcing right now? And that idea of like, can my current habits carry me to my desired future? Can my current habits carry me to my desired identity? And if not, then you have a misalignment there. And so you want to make sure that your behaviors, even if they're small, even if it's writing one sentence or doing one push-up, you want to make sure they're leading you toward that thing that you're optimizing for, whether it be external results or the internal identity.
How do you suggest for people listening to really, track these habits and the systems in place to ensure that there is a movement in the right path? Because I mean, the natural one, obviously, in the integrity reports, kind of a recap of the year, reminds me of. I do this as well at the end of the year, just reviewing everything I had set out for the year, but even almost even more importantly, some of the weekly or monthly check-ins. And I'm curious how you would direct people or suggest to check in with themselves so that the progress that people want is happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think that first, I feel like there's this pressure sometimes that people feel, sort of similar to like you're a senior in college or something, or people are like, what are you going to do? Like, what career do you want? And you sort of weirdly feel this pressure as if you like have to pick right, even though a career is something that happens over like 40 years and you're welcome to change your mind whenever you want. Like it feels more permanent than it really is. And so I think that would be my first suggestion is like, look, no decision is permanent. So when you come up with a set of values or the identity you're working toward, it is something that can and should be revisited and revised and edited over time. So the idea that people like get it right the first time, I don't think that's even one, I don't even really think it's possible because it's not, you can't get it right because you're not going to be static and the world's not going to be static. So you need to be revisiting and revising it over time. It's like, I think in Atomic Habits, I say something like you need to be willing to continuously upgrade and expand your identity. It's almost like retouching a painting, like you have to be willing to come back to it and, reshape it whenever necessary. The more that it actually almost hurts you to only do it once, because the more tightly you cling to a single identity, the harder it becomes to grow beyond it, right? You become almost like brittle because you're locking yourself into this one version of who you are rather than letting yourself fluidly expand and evolve over time. But to your question about measurement and the right way to do it, I don't know if it's the right way, but here are a couple ways.
Sure.
One is reflection and review. So we talked about the integrity report. That's something I do each year. I also, similar to what you were mentioning, I do an annual review, an annual report at the end of the year. The integrity report's more about like my values and principles, and the annual review is more like numbers focused, like how many workouts did I do, how many articles did I write, how many places did I travel to, stuff like that. It's like actually like tallying it up a little bit more. But I do agree with you. I think shorter cycles for measurement are also powerful. So in my case, like being an athlete or being someone who doesn't miss workouts, those are like aspects of my identity that I want to reinforce. So whenever I do a workout, I have a little workout journal. I keep a physical one where I write down each set, but you can do an app on your phone or whatever. But the point of that, like I don't actually learn that much from what I'm writing down for the exercises, like the act of writing it down. But the act of writing it down is like me ensuring that I'm just staying on track. It's basically like
your accountability.
Sure I'm showing up, right?
So
recording things like that, whether it's in a journal or an app or whatever, that can be helpful. I do a more weekly review cycle for my business where each Friday I kind of do this whole little check-in. I don't know, maybe it takes 30 minutes or something. It's just, I call it my weekly review, but it's, profit, expenses, revenue, all that type of stuff. Email subscribers, I'm just like checking in on key metrics, book sales, add in the book sales from last week, all that type of stuff. So, I don't think there's any one cycle that is best. It depends on the habit or the behavior that you're tracking. But the idea of, let me do kind of a big picture check-in, maybe once or twice a year, and let me do these smaller check-ins for the task, maybe daily or weekly or possibly monthly. I do think that both of those strategies are useful.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, even just personally, weekly, I started probably a year or 2 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, doing just a personal weekly check-in, kind of around 3:00, let's say, on a Friday, and just this is journaling, just purely answering 3 questions. What did I learn this week? What went well this week? And what would I have changed? And I've been just blown away at how much you can progress and learn about yourself. And this is literally a 10, max 15-minute exercise, but I feel like it, and just like what you're doing with your business, I think it pulls you out of the autopilot and just take a breath, take a look, what's going on. You can do a small course adjustment if needed. And, you roll into the weekend. And I also feel like it helps you roll into the weekend because you've done that, right? You've released, you've thought about your business or again, your personal objectives, and you can go into the weekend and then start on Monday kind of fresh, right?
It's so easy to let another moment slip by or to let a week slide away without realizing it. And I think those check-ins, it's almost like I mentioned something about this in the book. I can't remember exactly how I phrased it, but the habit of reflection and review. So in your case, the habit of those 3 questions, it's almost like a meta habit. It's like the more important thing, because if you can do that, then it shapes a lot of the other behaviors that follow. And if you don't have the habit of checking in on yourself like that, it's just easy to be on autopilot, or for, life is, you're always going to fill the time. Life will always come at you with other things or emergencies or whatever that need to take up space. So it's kind of reclaiming some of your time, reclaiming a lot of your attention and focus if you can just build that habit of reflection and review.
Hello, friends. Given you're here, I'm making the assumption that you're motivated to be mentally fit. So with that in mind, I want to let you know about the Better Questions newsletter, which publishes once or twice a month, providing all of us the opportunity to slow down, think, and ask better questions. As you know, quality questions are my thing, and this is an opportunity to share the prompts I've studied and curated to help our minds be healthier, clearer, more intentional, and expand our mental capacity. You can sign up over at behindthehuman.com/newsletter, which will also give you a preview of my debut book, Personal Socrates. That's behindthehuman.com/newsletter. Now back to the show.
I have to get, because I want to be conscious of your time, I have to get your 3 reflective questions. I mean, I've already taken note of some really powerful questions, especially the one around optimization. But if there are any that you feel are consistent in your life personally, that you're asking yourself, whether you're physically journaling, whether you're taking a walk, thinking about them, or during big life-changing events, that's another one that's helpful. Please leave them, because I leave these in the show notes, and they're just great jumping off or anchors to help someone reflect on where they're at in their life based on a question like this. One might resonate with others. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I love questions. I think that questions are more helpful than advice, because advice is context dependent. It's dependent on the circumstance, the application, the timing, the person who is, implementing it. And so even for somebody who's in the same industry or dealing with a similar problem, good advice may not be good because it's the wrong time or whatever. For whatever reason may take it off course. But a question is very flexible. And so I think that usually finding the right question to ask yourself is more helpful than finding the right advice to follow. So we already talked about what am I optimizing for? Who am I optimizing to become? I think those are crucial questions. There's another one that I mentioned, but didn't quite put as quite of a finer point on it, that I also think is crucial, which is, can my current habits carry me to my desired future? I think that's a crucial one for figuring out alignment with your behaviors and what you're looking to do. There's another question that I like, a big picture one that I just kind of ask every now and then, which is, am I climbing the right mountain?
Love that.
I think, one of the most dangerous things is to become successful at the wrong thing. You spend all this time optimizing, getting better, focusing, spending hours and attention. And it's like, was that the right mountain to be climbing? And status seeking, I think in particular, status signaling, however you want to define it, it really can pull us off course a lot of the time. People they climb this mountain of a career that they don't really love because the money was attractive or the position sounded sexy or it was a good title or whatever. Like there's, and those things can matter and do matter to certain degrees, but you just need to be sure that it's the right mountain for you. So I think that question is one that I like a lot. Let me think here.
Is there something that's been new that you've added over the last few months?
Yeah, there's one recently I've been asking myself more, which is like, am I being effective right now, or am I just busy? And that kind of helps clarify, like, am I really allocating my time in the highest and best use? Like, am I just, there's like that difference between motion and action. Like motion is doing things, but they would never get you a result just on their own. Whereas action is something that can actually get you a result. Like, for example, if you go to the gym and you talk to a personal trainer, that's motion. It doesn't matter how many times you talk to a personal trainer, you'll never get fit just by doing that. But if you get under the bar and you do 10 squats, that's action, because that actually could get you the result you're looking for. Now, that doesn't mean you should never talk to a personal trainer. It can be useful. It's just that you need to be honest with yourself about if it's motion or if it's action. And the motion should be moving you toward action, not simply, it's like when planning becomes a form of procrastination, you should stop planning. You just need to act on whatever plan you have. So I think that question helps me a little bit, and I've kind of been thinking about more recently. I also like the question of like, you can say this about a person or a circumstance or a task, but is this giving me energy or taking it away? Like, is this relationship bringing energy into my life, or is it taking energy out of it? Is this project bringing energy into my life or taking energy out of it? And of course, all the things that you work on require some level of effort and energy. But man, there's something very different about a person or a relationship or a task or a project that lights you up inside. It's almost like the time you spend on it gives you more time back, gives you more energy back. And then there's other things that are like a black hole. So that idea of like, is this giving me energy, or is it bringing energy into the room or taking energy out of it? I think.
Well, it almost reminds me of what we were talking about, that whole 80-20% rule as well. To your point, there are for sure certain things that you have to do that will suck up energy. But if that is 80% of your day or life, the forecast on that one's not looking too great. So just, again, a quick little self-check-in on with that prompt is super powerful.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's 4 or 5 that.
Yeah. There's these are all fantastic. I mean, the last question for you is related to all your work. And I just wanted to get your perspective on, when people are consuming your material and everything you stand for, like, what do you want the reader and the person on the other side to feel after they've taken in your work?
I don't know. It's a tough question because, like, certainly, we all think about how's this going to land with people and will people find it useful, but also, like, to a certain degree, what they think of it is kind of like their opinion or their. If they think it's great, then good. That's good for me. If they think it's bad, then, like, to a certain degree, that's kind of like their problem, not mine, because I don't have control over how people feel about it. That said, of course, I'm very interested in, like, whether people find it useful or not. And so what I come back to, and this is something Josh Kaufman told me a long time ago, he's another author, but, like, there are sort of 3 things. Is it true? Is it useful? Is it clear? And those are kind of the 3 things that I try to achieve with everything I write. Like, I want to write it, there's that line, I think it's a Hemingway line, where it's like, just write one true sentence. And that's kind of how I feel about each sentence. Like, let me just say something that is honest, that is factual, that is true, that's, in some cases, if it can be measured, scientifically backed. So I want it to be true. I want it to be useful. I want to write things that are actionable and practical and that people can actually implement in daily life. Knowledge is great and science is great, and I do appreciate it for its own use. But I kind of feel like wisdom is knowing when to apply knowledge or how to apply it. And so I don't just want to share knowledge, I want to share wisdom. I want to share things that are useful and actionable and helpful. And then I want it to be clear, assuming that it's true and assuming that it's useful, let's say it in the simplest way possible. I don't need people to think I'm smart. I just want to be helpful. And so let's get rid of the big words. Let's find a better metaphor or better analogy. Let's determine a more clear and simple way to explain it. And if I succeed, when I write things that are good, I think they usually hit those 3 marks: true, useful, clear.
That's a powerful 3 questions, I guess you could say, or just one line or concept in itself. I mean, I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation and leave all of these questions. But I think more so just that you've devoted a lot of your life and your time to put out really thought-provoking material that, I don't want people to get the wrong impression that, just it pushes you back and you're stuck in a cycle of thought and you can't move forward. You also have all or many practical applications and tips and advice on moving through that thought process. But I feel like it's rare to have that combination. A lot of people do one of those things really well. But it's been beautiful to just witness you doing both of those aspects really well. So thank you for devoting that time and energy to your craft, because it's obviously, and this, it's changing a lot of lives around the world.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, thanks for saying that. I don't know. I mean, I still miss the mark plenty of times, but I'm trying my best to share things that are helpful. So it's great to hear you say that and hear that you're finding it useful too.
You're human, James. Welcome to the club. Where can I direct people? I mean, I'll obviously link out to the book and your site. Is there anything else that you would like to put up in the show notes?
Yeah. If you want to go straight to the book, it's just Atomic Habits. You can go to atomichabits.com. And if you'd like to check some of the other things that I write, some of the articles I put together, you can find all that at jamesclear.com. If you click on articles, I think they're organized by category, and you can kind of dive into whatever's useful for you. And then if you're also interested in the 321 newsletter, then you can sign up there, and that'll come out each week.
Love it. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, and have the best day yet.
Great. Thanks.